Hi, my name's Hannes, this is Painting by Letters, and today I just want to talk. This isn't a project or some grand attempt to do something interesting, but really is just me trying to unpick some of the thoughts that I've been having. I suffer from hobbybarrassment. That's the first use of the term. It's mine, credit me, I want royalties. Many thanks. In my earlier videos on this channel, I say that like I've not been going for about 3 seconds, but hey ho, I often had this clip. A set of wooden trays being placed on a table. These trays come from this box. It's an antique, I do not know how old or its original purpose. Those elements are kind of not relevant to me. It was bought in a town called Hexham about 2 years ago by a family member and gifted to me on the last year that they were alive. Funny how emotions get wound up in items, isn't it? This box, however, hides my shame. That is the explicit truth. I am ashamed of Warhammer. Sounds a bit silly, doesn't it? I'm an adult who likes hobbies. Why should I be ashamed? Why should I feel the need to hide things away in a box like this? I want to explore that question and then round the video off with a point about embarrassment itself. The main themes I will be discussing before the conclusion are support networks and how I didn't really have one, the inherent silliness of the hobby, how I hide my embarrassment, and the benefits of the Warhammer hobby. I want to bring this all together and discuss embarrassment as a constituent part at the end. So let's begin. Support networks and how I didn't really have one. Most people I know got into this hobby through a parent or other guiding figure who showed them the ropes, brought them their first tools. We see images on Reddit or other social media, I assume I only use Reddit, of parents introducing their kids to the hobby, bringing the joy that exists in our plastic crack to the world. These people show these images with such happiness and spread this joy of the hobby to new generations. Genuine props to these people. I hope to be one such person one day. Yeah, I didn't have that luxury. I saw a friend of mine get into Warhammer and talk and obsess about Space Wolves, so I just kind of had to have them. I was sort of one of those kids when I was younger. I made him very happy about that at the time as well. Hi Josh, I know you watch these. We used to play games in the room at the back of our school. And yeah, it was ridiculous. We'd have 2 sets of practically the same army marching at each other. He, however, had a family that supported his hobby and helped him into it, and I'm not saying that I had a family that actively discouraged me, but they didn't really promote it as something that I should do. So, my parents are religious, and I think particularly the anti-religious satire in the world and the law just wasn't something that sat very comfortable with them. I feel like I can kind of understand that, but still. I was allowed to do Warhammer, don't get me wrong. They gave money, they allowed me to go to places like the Metro Centre and buy things. They never stopped me, don't get me wrong. But it definitely was something that felt like the expectation, perhaps, was that I was supposed to grow out of it. Which I sort of did. I guess I've relapsed, I don't know. When I was a teenager, I think this was my rebellion. I was teetotal, or if you don't know that term, it means I didn't drink alcohol. I have never smoked. I was always overweight, but I was the kind of person who read books, aspired to good universities from a young age, loved literature and philosophy. I was not really supposed to be interested in these things. In that context, my uncomfortability with this hobby, or being public about it, really makes some sense. I know only about 14 or so months ago, I went to pick up what I could from my parents' garage under the false pretense that I would sell it, and I felt the desperate need to say that if I didn't didn't sell it, I would bin it. I want to talk in another video about why this hobby means a lot to me, but it really is something I was ashamed of. There's also the inherent silliness of the hobby. I guess talking more broadly, it is something that's often ridiculed as well. Graham Norton, in a now infamous clip, tried to make fun of Henry Cavill for it and for being interested in the hobby.
Your nerd flag with pride.
Yes.
Now, one of your hobbies, and he's got a lot of them, ladies and gentlemen, one of your hobbies is you paint...
Makes me sound weird.
Well, well, you do have more hobbies than the average man, I'd say. But you paint, is it World of Warcraft?
Warhammer.
Warhammer, I'm a fool.
Yep.
And really, if we're honest with ourselves, it is a bit ridiculous, isn't it? A little bit. It's a satire, or originally was, serial numbers ever being filed off and causing controversy at every turn, but nevertheless. It was supposed to make fun of all the elements that caused the very British humour that is rife in the setting. It's jokes about Christian religion. I mean, the God Emperor is literally a man who gave his life so you could live. The Gothic architecture is synonymous with British society. There is no city that does not have a fabulous cathedral of stone jutting into the sky. And the bureaucratic nightmare of the British civil service, and how that's often by design to stifle action. That itself being the entire point of several British comedies, Yes Minister perhaps being the best. It's a lambasting of our culture at base. It's supposed to be a bit funny, yet it makes me uncomfortable that I cannot easily reconcile the way I feel about miniatures as a hobby and that fact. Let's deal with another truism. What we do with these models is a bit silly, isn't it? We spend hundreds of hours planning, building, painting and list building. Then we take them to venues and slowly move our plastic men in a dance that ultimately makes nothing other than our limited lives on this planet go by. We use tape measures and dice to settle disputes. It's kind of ridiculous, isn't it? In the way that only human beings could, we've invented an excuse to spend time with each other and give ourselves something to discuss. I do think that's beautiful in a way, but it's also very silly. I do at base often think that that really is my problem, that it's silly. It feels like something I shouldn't be doing. I should be bettering myself perhaps in other more meaningful ways, potentially a theme developing there. Let's discuss for a minute how I hide my embarrassment. I thus want to return to talking about this box, what it does for me, why I love it. We all need a storage solution, but this box is a storage solution for hobby supplies that looks okay in a living room. No guest in this property is going to rifle through a very small chest of drawers in someone else's house. It hides my silliness away. My shame at this hobby is contained, relegated, and the panoptic nightmare of modern life cannot quite grasp it. There is another thing about this box. The person who bought it for me was the person who would take me shopping for Games Workshop. They would take me to the Metro Centre in Gateshead once a month, and I would always go with, just to stare in the shop and beg for something from it. I cherish a lot of those memories. This box allows me to hide my interest away, reject it from myself perhaps, and it also makes setup and clear down of painting so much quicker. So let's go through it. The top drawer is supposed to be a lock, but it doesn't have a key. Inside I place items I do not need much. Right now it's some green stuff, a dry palette, some knives, some geek gaming supplies, anything I do not need regularly or is still in containers. Looking at you, moulding tools. Just big enough to hold these items comfortably and keeps everything tucked away quite nicely. The drawer below is my tools drawer. Anything I'm going to need regularly. All of my brushes are in here. Now don't judge, I do not store them properly, but to be honest, I'm a big fan of using cheap brushes I do not have to care about. If they split, then I'll use them for something else. I know from camera equipment that having items that are of a decent value is often not that fun an experience. It can be unnerving to feel like one has done something that might damage an item. So I try and keep these sort of things as cheap as possible because it makes me feel better if something goes wrong. I've also got my snips. They were slightly more expensive than I would like, but I've had too many snap on me this point, so sod it, I bought them. I've also got my main knife and anything else I might need to hand. The third drawer is what I often refer to as my weird and wonderfuls. I've been trying to experiment with different tools and items for some time. This has involved buying some GW stuff. This drawer contains my washes, technical paints, contrast paints from their store. They don't really fit, so they just sort of get thrown in here. I've also got some cork because I always seem to need it. Seriously, it's super useful and easy to cut. There's also some brush on primer in here. I've used this quite a lot before. When something needs reshaped last minute, it works really well. The final layer are my main paints. This is the Vallejo paints I use for my main hobbying. There is a good set of complementary paints in here, however I think I'm less fond of their glossy finish than I was when I first got back in the hobby. Annoyingly, I seem to prefer GW stuff now, but then I don't like the containers, so I need this to work out. I have also just started looking into the Duncan Rhodes paints. I bought 6 of them the day before I recorded this audio, so we'll see what I think of those in time as well. Together, these 4 drawers are my workspace. I place down a cutting board to protect the table and then place these around it. I've got nearly everything I need. This allows me to have that hobby space feel and environment where everything is to hand and I can easily slot things away if I need to. I get to have the aspirational hobby space without having to confront those who visit my abode with my hobby and explain it. This is how I hide that shame. And yet now I've been using a system like this for a while, I doubt I would go back to a more traditional storage solution. The mobility of this environment is also key. If I want to paint here, in my office upstairs, or somewhere else in the house, I can. I grab my 3 drawers and my cutting table and I move. I have unpicked my hobbybarrassment. I have come up with tools and methods to avoid it, and yet I cannot really unmake it. And now, with the board build and other things, I've recently bought some items that don't fit in this box, and I need a new piece of storage. Luckily for me, I received this other box from another family member. I'm going to use this as a new home for the Geek Gaming Scenic stuff that I'm using for the board that I'm building, but I'm in a position where I am embarrassed by what I spend my evenings doing. This embarrassment is partially the reason this channel exists. It's an attempt to get past that. I also have a habit these days of discussing it at work. I'm very open with my hobby to those I work with. I admit, it's like some secret to which I need to whisper, but I do say it. This journey into my psychology and my own habit of hiding things away has a bit of a purpose though. I actually love this hobby and can wax lyrical about it at no end. So then let's discuss the benefits of the Warhammer hobby. I started thinking about this video and originally scripting it after a conversation that I had with someone at work. I'd brought Warhammer up to make a bit of a self-deprecating joke about my nerdy hobbies, and they turned round and defended the hobby from my joke. They're someone who has no relationship with this hobby at all, really, other than the fact that their son got interested in it when they were a young teenager. And they described taking their son to the shop once a week, that he always had to have something, that he was always painting it, and this developed in him a love of graphic design and things like that, propelled him on to do that then at university. And now, although he's left the hobby, he now works at a major television studio in the UK. And he has always said that his interest in those things stems entirely from picking up the original skills in Warhammer. And it's a major success story. And you think that there must be absolutely tons of people who've ended up where they are now because they got interested in a hobby that's creative, that gives them the space to self-express, but also a hobby that requires them to think things through and work with others. All the skill sets you need to be a person in the modern world, a professional in the modern world, seem to also be the skill sets required to be good at this hobby. I realised I have a very similar story to tell. I personally got into macro photography entirely because I wanted to take pictures of my Warhammer. I've won competitions in macro photography and as well also ran a very small little business in macro photography, which is how I actually ended up affording any of the equipment that I used to make these videos with. That also inspired an interest in computers to edit, and years later that skill set has won me the last 2 jobs that I have. I do a creative job, and it's hard not to see creativity as a kid as part of it. I work on software simulation, and that's rules and logics. I spent years as a kid poring over every page of a codex, and I bought as many of them as I could afford, and I read every rule and tried to break them all down. I work on a lot of project management day to day, and yeah, that's just list building in Excel. I'm one of those honest people with a proficiency in Excel on my CV who knows how to use it, and that's because back in 6th edition I built a monstrous Excel booklet with every codex, and I had running macros and formulae to test units against each other with loadouts all built in Excel. I liaise with stakeholders, and that undoubtedly comes from being able to talk to others, something I learned in Warhammer events as a teenager. I'm genuinely passionate about Warhammer as a brilliant, life-defining thing to be into. As an aside, I'm a bit suspicious of the argument I'm making here. You're going to have to forgive the ex-philosophy student for feeling very uncomfortable with a nature versus nurture argument going on. The argument essentially I'm making is that obviously Warhammer gives you the skills and nurtures those skills to make you into a certain person. Whereas of course it could just be that the people that were already predisposed to get there naturally find themselves interested in Warhammer. So it's entirely possible that I might be putting the cart before the horse a little bit. But either way round, I think it is true that Warhammer hones the skills that make people good professionals in the modern world. So I suppose to conclude, or to finish the ramble, I would like to explore the thought I've been having since I first scripted this video a few weeks ago. I'm actually embarrassed that I'm embarrassed. To explain why, let's recap what we've discussed. We started with support networks and how I didn't really have one. This one obviously will strike people differently. I suspect it's worse for me than most watching. I also suspect that if you got into the hobby as an adult, it probably won't affect you. Most people will have grown up with the hobby being normal. This was not their rebellion or the thing that they should not have been doing, but parents relented. This was a normal part of their day-to-day lives with families and the games that they would play. Secondly, we talked about the inherent silliness of the hobby. To do what we do, I think at least, is a statement about self-confidence. I suspect it sort of has to be. We are doing something others naturally think of as a bit of a joke, and let's not forget that its satirical aspects are supposed to be funny. It's a self-aware universe that knows how stupid it's being. This does make the actions a little silly though. How I hide my embarrassment was the third section. Again, a personal one, but hiding my hobby is how I've ended up in this situation where it's become really hard to relinquish that embarrassment itself. I'm obviously trying hard to fix this with this channel, right? I'm being very public right now with my relinquishing of this. But it's an issue that instead of meeting this embarrassment straight on, historically at least, I have relented. And then I suppose fourthly, the benefits of the Warhammer hobby. This is the more universal point and cements where I want to conclude. This hobby brings joy to so many. It's a clear mental health aid. It gives people in this community skills, and it gives us social engagements and the space to meet others. This hobby does so much for us that arguably, and if you'll let me be slightly pretentious, that the modern world stops us from doing. Most design software these days will make up some of the production of a creative element. We do not socialise as we might have done in previous generations, as we now lock ourselves away and watch TV on our phones, and our mental health problems come from the fact that a lot of our creations are intangible. Warhammer is the antidote to a lot of modern issues, but it's also something to actually be proud of, I think. It has flaws, do not get me wrong, but it does a lot for those in this hobby in our mental health, creativity and social lives. This hobby is a brilliant thing to be involved in. Recognising that, I'm embarrassed to be embarrassed by it. I think as time goes on and the benefits of this amazing hobby are increasingly noticed, it will become less and less embarrassing, and hopefully personally I'll get over my hang-ups. I'm going to be slightly controversial and say that I've never believed that Warhammer will be the mainstream. The bar to entry is way, way too high. But it's on track to be seen in a more positive light. I look forward to that day at least. As a very quick aside, I got a comment recently from someone saying, I'm really glad your channel isn't very pretentious, and I feel like I've entirely destroyed that in the next video that I've published. So I'm really sorry, my friend. I'm really sorry. Anyway, this was an experiment. Let me know what you thought of this style. Thank you so much for listening. It's been a pleasure as always. I've been Hannes, this has been Painting by Letters, and keep safe out there.